Welcome, my soft-thinking listener. You've found yourself in the company of the Sleepy Sloth once again. A slow, scientifically minded fellow, who enjoys facts, the quiet unfolding of ancient human habits, and the unhurried ways in which they left marks for others to find. I must tell you something before we begin. Today, I consider myself a scientist in the earliest chapters of writing. Those hesitant scratches, marks, and impressions that happened long before anyone would have called them letters. A scientist who is almost always correct, except for those few times when I am not. But even then, I prefer to drift gently onward, rather than fuss over it. Because what truly matters is the information itself. Before I start, please, let me know, what is the most boring thing you would secretly love hearing about? Let me know gently, in the comments. Now, let us begin today's episode with the earliest beginnings of writing. We drift first to a time so far away it feels like another planet. About 20,000 years before the calendars we know would ever be made. In what is now called Central Africa, someone once held a piece of bone, the fibula of a baboon, perhaps, and with slow, deliberate care, carved a sequence of small lines into its surface. This quiet artifact, known today as the Ishango bone, is thought to be one of the earliest tally sticks. Each marked perhaps counting days, tracing the gentle rhythm of lunar cycles, or recording something so ordinary that it has since dissolved into the mist of forgotten meaning. The marks rest in patient patterns, grouped with intention. Not the hurried scratches of accident, but the calm arrangement of a mind that understood its own purpose. You may not care, and that is perfectly fine. For such indifference is the soft ground where quiet facts may sleep undisturbed. From there, we float 15,000 years before the present moment, to the dimly lit caves of Lascaux and what is now France. Here, in the cool stone halls, the walls are alive with ochre and black. Horses, bulls, and deer in mid-motion. Yet between these creatures, like small murmurs in a crowded room, there are repeated shapes. Dots, lines, and marks whose meaning drifts just beyond our reach. Not quite words, not yet, but consistent enough to suggest a message only the painter would have known. Perhaps they marked a count of hunts, or the turning of a season. Or perhaps they were only for beauty. That uncertainty, my listener, is a perfect companion for sleep. For in the absence of answers, the mind can wander freely. We drift onward to around 10,000 years before now, when in early farming villages, people began to press soft, cool clay into tiny, carefully shaped tokens, each one a stand-in for something in daily life. A round token might mean a measure of grain. A cone might mean a jar of oil. A flat disc could mean a flock of sheep. These were agreements made without speech, a quiet pact between those who shaped them and those who could read their meaning simply by touch and sight. In these tokens was an early form of accounting, a way to remember, when memory alone could falter. By about 8,000 years before our present breath, these clay tokens became more precise, more formalized. Not just any sphere, but a sphere of a certain size, whose weight and curve might matter. Not just any cone, but one tilted at just the right angle, its tip sharp or blunted depending on its meaning. The makers worked with intention, shaping them slowly, perhaps drying them in the sun until they were firm enough to last. These refinements carried silent messages, clarifying the invisible agreement between maker and reader, so that no matter how far the token traveled, its meaning would remain fixed. And then, about 6,500 years before today, the system grew more complex still. Tokens could stand not only for grain but for 3 jars of grain stored by the river or 5 measures of barley promised to the temple. Sometimes these small pieces were placed together inside hollow clay envelopes, their contents hidden from view. To remember what lay within, the maker would press the tokens gently into the wet outer surface before sealing it shut, leaving small impressions like a whisper to anyone who understood. This was the faintest shadow of what writing would one day become, an echo of a language that had not yet been born. At last, we arrive around 4,000 years before the start of the calendar most people use today. In the bustling city of Uruk, in ancient Mesopotamia. Here, the impressions were made without tokens at all. Instead, a reed stylus, cut at an angle, was pressed directly into a flat clay tablet, damp and yielding beneath the hand. Each mark was deliberate, forming pictographs that stood for goods, names, and ideas. A jar might be drawn as a simple outline, a head of cattle as a curve with horns. This was proto-cuneiform, a language of marks instead of objects. A silent voice pressed into earth. And not long after, about 3,400 years before our common calendar began, the first true writing system emerged, Sumerian cuneiform. Wedge-shaped impressions, carefully arranged in lines, could now record not only what existed but what had happened. Laws passed, trades agreed upon, prayers offered to the gods, and even stories that wandered across the tablets like gentle rivers of thought. Once dried in the sun or baked in a kiln, these words could survive for centuries, enduring long after the hands that made them had stilled. And so, words began to live in clay, carrying the quiet voices of the past into the endless stretch of time. In the soft turning of time, somewhere around the year 3200 before our present calendars would even dream of existing, the people along the life-giving banks of the Nile began to paint and carve a most particular language upon stone, wood, and papyrus. These were the Egyptian hieroglyphs, not merely pictures, though they looked like delicate illustrations from a patient hand, but an intricate weaving of logograms, which stood for whole ideas or objects, and phonetic signs, which caught the sounds of their spoken words like tiny nets holding a breeze. The falcon might be the god Horus, or the sound HRW, depending on where it rested in the sentence. A simple ripple might mean water, or merely the end sound. Each sign was both itself and something else, a dual life wrapped in pigment and shadow. Writing them required a careful hand, a steady wrist, and a mind tuned to both art and precision. These signs found their way onto temple walls, tombs, and the delicate rolls of papyrus, speaking silently across centuries. The stone-cut hieroglyphs were often painted in rich colors, which would fade with the slow passing of time but remain just enough to suggest the vibrancy they once held. And even though they could be read left to right, right to left, or top to bottom, the direction was known by the way the figures faced, as if they were always politely looking toward the beginning of the thought. It was a script made for beauty as much as for meaning, unhurried in its purpose. Around 3,100 years before what we now call the present, the lands along the Nile quietly began to hold their stories not just in memory but in the soft impressions of clay and ivory. These early administrative tablets were not designed to dazzle, but rather to gently capture the rhythm of daily life, the taxes paid, the goods exchanged, the grain carefully measured and stored. Officials, draped in simple linens, made marks with practiced hands, turning the ephemeral flow of commerce into something steady and reliable. These small tablets whispered of a civilization learning to balance the abundance of the river's flood with the demands of growing order, a quiet testament to the first murmurs of bureaucracy that would hum beneath the grand tales of kings and gods for millennia to come. Not far in time or space, about 3,000 years before today, in the fertile valleys that would later be known as Iran, a curious and intricate script emerged. This Proto-Elamite writing, still wrapped in the mystery of its few deciphered symbols, adorned clay tablets with lines and shapes that spoke of people managing their world. Temple scribes and merchants alike used this script to record the movements of goods, the labors owed, and the offerings made. Though its language slipped away into silence after just a few centuries, the delicate impressions left behind invite us to imagine a society quietly weaving its own thread into the tapestry of early human communication, a gentle echo from a long-forgotten time. By the time the world had turned to roughly 2,600 years before our modern calendars, the wedge-shaped language of cuneiform in Mesopotamia had blossomed into a form rich enough to cradle not only accounts and decrees but also the dreams of storytellers. Among these was the Epic of Gilgamesh, a tale pressed into clay, where a king's quest for immortality unfurled like slow, whispered poetry. Scribes, with steady reeds, traced each symbol with a care that transformed mere marks into vessels of myth, grief, and hope. These tablets, once soft and warm beneath their fingers, have endured the centuries, carrying the quiet voices of those who first taught writing to dream beyond the counting of goods. A little later still, near 2,500 years before now, the cities of ancient Mesopotamia grew ever more connected through language. Sumerian, the ancient tongue of temples and courts, met Akkadian, the rising language of kings and merchants, and together they found harmony on the same clay tablets. Words flowed side by side, a bilingual dance that allowed ideas and laws to cross boundaries. These inscriptions were more than practical tools, they were bridges, quietly uniting people through shared understanding, carrying whispers of cooperation and diplomacy across the dusty streets and bustling markets of a world still learning to speak in many voices at once. Around 2,400 years before our present time, in the ancient city of Sumer, a quiet shift took place, not in the grand temples or marketplaces, but within the measured lines of a written law. The Code of Urukagina emerged as one of the earliest known attempts to capture justice and order in words pressed softly into clay. This code whispered protections for the weak, limits on taxes, and regulations on property, seeking to balance society with gentle firmness. Though the voices of those who lived by these laws have long since faded, their echoes linger in the steady impression of a hand that wished to bind fairness and duty together beneath the sun's slow arc. The tablets that carry these laws are reminders that even in the humblest corners of history, the desire for structure and kindness found its way into quiet permanence. Not long after, near 2,300 years before now, the language spoken by many in Mesopotamia began to change its tune. Akkadian, a Semitic language with flowing vowels and consonants, gradually replaced the ancient Sumerian as the everyday voice of the people. Yet, the Sumerian script, the marks pressed into clay with reed styluses, refused to vanish. It remained like a ghostly guardian, preserved in the scribe's careful hands, used for ceremonial texts and scholarly pursuits. This layered relationship between spoken word and written symbol created a tapestry where old and new intertwined softly, like shadows folding into one another at dusk. A little further east, around 2,200 years before our time, the Indus Valley civilization blossomed along the rivers now called the Indus and Sarasvati. Here, on small seals and tablets, mysterious symbols appeared, an undeciphered script known today as the Indus script. These signs, often geometric or animal-shaped, seem to hold meaning, perhaps names or titles, or marks of trade and ownership. Though their full story remains hidden, their quiet presence hints at a society rich in communication and record-keeping, silently marking the dawn of writing beyond Mesopotamia and Egypt. By about 2,000 years before the calendar we use today, the island of Crete stirred with its own script, Linear A. This elegant system of signs, brushed or incised onto clay tablets and pottery, remains largely undeciphered, a soft enigma from the Minoan civilization. Each mark, flowing and deliberate, speaks to ritual, trade, or record-keeping, wrapped in the mystery of a culture that flourished quietly beneath olive groves and sea breezes. The symbols seem to breathe with the island's gentle rhythms, a whisper of stories long since passed beyond the reach of sound. Close to 1900 years before the present day, in the heart of Assyria, the cuneiform script found a new purpose. Adapted by merchants and scribes for the demands of long-distance trade, Old Assyrian cuneiform appeared on clay tablets that tracked goods, loans, and contracts across vast deserts and rivers. These records, often brisk and businesslike, connected cities like Ashur and Kanesh, weaving together economies through written promises. The steady tapping of the stylus on clay marked not just commerce, but the growing trust in written words to carry human agreements beyond the spoken moment. Around 1800 years before the present, in the bustling city of Babylon, scribes gathered with quiet determination to bring order to their world of marks and impressions. The cuneiform script, with its many wedge-shaped signs, was carefully standardized, each shape honed and fixed so that students could learn to read and write with steady confidence. This act of formalizing the script was more than a technical step, it was a gentle gesture toward preserving knowledge and culture across generations. Clay tablets, once a tangle of varied signs, became clearer and more consistent, allowing young apprentices to practice the art of writing under the watchful eyes of patient teachers. The very shapes carved into the clay seemed to slow, as if settling into their final form, ready to carry stories, laws, and ledgers into the centuries ahead. Not long after, near 1700 years before today, the rugged lands of Anatolia, what we now call Turkey, began to host a new kind of writing, Hittite hieroglyphs. Unlike their Egyptian cousins, these hieroglyphs were often carved on stone monuments and seals, blending pictures and symbols to record names, titles, and sacred words. The signs were bold yet reserved, etched into the landscape like quiet monuments that watched over cities and temples. They spoke in a language both visual and symbolic, bridging art and communication in ways that still invite careful study. Each carved line carried the weight of ceremony and authority, a slow and steady voice in the rocky hills and fertile plains. By around 1600 years before our calendar's present, across the seas and mountains of Greece, the Mycenaean civilization developed a script now known as Linear B. This writing, painted or inscribed onto clay tablets, was used primarily for administrative purposes, recording inventories, lists of goods, and offerings to gods. Though its signs look simple and linear, each symbol stood for a syllable, capturing the sounds of the early Greek language. The tablets themselves were cool and rough beneath the hands of scribes who worked in dim rooms, their careful strokes preserving the hum of palace life long after its echoes faded. About a century later, roughly 1500 years before today, somewhere near the Sinai Peninsula, a new kind of writing took its first, delicate breaths. The Proto-Sinaitic script emerged, a collection of simple symbols that would eventually grow into alphabetic systems. These early signs, inspired by Egyptian hieroglyphs but transformed through local creativity, represented individual sounds rather than whole words or ideas. This modest invention was a gentle revolution. By breaking language into its smallest sounds, it opened a path toward alphabets that could be learned and used by many, not just scribes. It was the whisper of a new way to capture speech in writing, simple and accessible, ready to spread like seeds on the desert wind. By about 1400 years before the present, the Linear B script had matured and was in full use across the Mycenaean palaces of Greece. These clay tablets carried the pulse of a complex society, accounts of warriors, shipments of oil and grain, offerings made in grand ceremonies. The symbols, arranged with care and precision, recorded not just numbers but names and places, capturing the breath of an ancient people through the cool, lasting medium of baked clay. The scribe's stylus moved steadily, pressing signs that, though silent now, once sang the language of heroes and kings beneath a sky that held both promise and mystery. Somewhere near 1300 years before the time we now quietly call the present, in the ancient city of Ugarit nestled along the eastern Mediterranean coast, a fresh approach to writing began to take shape. The Ugaritic script, carved carefully into clay tablets with styluses sharpened to gentle points, formed an alphabet unlike most before it. Unlike the dense clusters of symbols that had filled earlier tablets, this system used simple wedge-shaped marks to represent sounds, making writing a softer, more flexible dance. The Ugaritic alphabet allowed scribes to capture the poetry of their language, the names of kings, and the offerings made to gods with an elegance that felt almost like a slow breath carried over warm sea breezes. Though it would one day disappear into the folds of history, Its quiet presence marked a subtle turning point in the long story of human communication, hinting at the alphabetic systems to come, as if the seeds of future scripts were settling softly into the soil of memory. The world shifted gently a century later, about 1200 years before our own counting of days, when a great unraveling quietly swept through the Bronze Age civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Palaces that once gleamed with painted frescoes fell silent, cities grew still, and with them, some of the scripts that recorded their stories, like the elegant linear B of the Mycenaeans, vanished. This collapse was slow, like autumn leaves falling softly from ancient trees, their colors fading and then blending into the earth. The loss of these writing systems meant that some voices were muffled beneath the weight of time, leaving fragments behind, like faint echoes heard through the thick moss of forgotten ruins. Yet, even in this dimming, the whispers of writing found new forms elsewhere, patiently waiting to bloom again. Not long after this quiet twilight, around 1100 years before today, the sea winds carried more than just salt and fish between ports and islands. They bore a remarkable innovation, the Phoenician alphabet. This set of simple, angular letters, each a symbol for a single sound, was unlike the tangled scripts of earlier ages. Merchants and sailors etched these signs onto parchment and stone, allowing words to flow swiftly across trade networks that reached from the Levant deep into the Mediterranean. The Phoenician script was a gentle lantern in the dark, guiding communication with clarity and ease. Its letters, like small feathers drifting on a breeze, were easy to learn and fast to write, spreading quietly yet widely, planting the roots for many alphabets that would follow in the centuries to come. By about 1,000 years before our present day, nestled within this web of letters and sounds, a new script appeared to record the early Hebrew tongue. Borrowing from the Phoenician tradition, this early Hebrew script transformed familiar shapes into marks that traced the sacred stories and laws of a people connected to their land and to each other. Written slowly by hand on scrolls and pottery, these letters moved in lines like a gentle stream flowing through quiet valleys. They captured prayers, genealogies, and histories, becoming a vessel for cultural memory as enduring as the olive trees that shaded the hills. This script was less an invention and more a tender continuation, a soft whisper passed from one generation to the next, carrying both word and spirit alike. As the centuries turned toward 900 years before today, another script began to weave its quiet spell across the Near East. The Aramaic alphabet became a shared language, a lingua franca spoken and written from bustling bazaars to quiet temples. Its characters, simple yet expressive, flowed with the ease of river currents, carrying messages across diverse peoples and places. Used by traders, diplomats, and scribes alike, Aramaic's gentle script bridged languages and cultures, easing communication in a world of many voices. Like slowly turning gears in a vast machine, the Aramaic alphabet set the rhythm for centuries of writing, embedding itself in history as a steady companion for those who sought to preserve their words beyond the breath of a single moment. Around 800 years before the present moment, along the sun-warmed shores of the Aegean Sea, something quietly remarkable was unfolding in the way people chose to capture their speech. The Greek alphabet, born gently from its Phoenician ancestor, began to take shape with a subtle but profound change, the addition of vowels. These small, softly shaped letters allowed the language to sing more clearly, tracing the breath and flow of words with greater precision. Unlike earlier scripts that focused mostly on consonant sounds, the Greek alphabet could now cradle the full music of language, the rising and falling tones, the open and closed sounds, as if the letters themselves were catching whispers carried on the salt-kissed air. This innovation, delicate and patient, paved the way for stories, poetry, and philosophy to be recorded with a new kind of clarity, each character turning slowly like a leaf on a quiet breeze. Shortly after, by about 750 years ago in our calendar's gentle count, the earliest surviving Greek inscriptions began to appear, etched into pottery and stone with steady hands. Among these, the dipylon oinoko, a wine jug carved with intricate patterns and the oldest known Greek writing, invites us to imagine a craftsman patiently tracing words alongside the swirls of decoration. These inscriptions were practical yet poetic, marking ownership or dedicating gifts, their letters standing like tiny pillars in the soft, fading light of an ancient evening. The shapes are angular but welcoming, hinting at a script still young, learning its voice but already eager to tell quiet stories. Meanwhile, as the centuries drifted closer to 700 years before now, the Italian peninsula saw the emergence of the Etruscan script. This writing borrowed heavily from the Greek alphabet but was given its own gentle twist by the Etruscans, whose cities and tombs whispered with art and mystery. Their script, carved into tombstones or painted on pottery, carried the sounds of a language now lost to time, yet preserved in these quiet marks. The letters, still angular but often more rounded, seemed to float lightly across stone surfaces, like feathers resting upon moss-covered branches. Through these inscriptions, we glimpse a culture attentive to memory and ritual, crafting writing that bridged life and afterlife with delicate care. A little later, around 600 years before the present day, the city of Rome began to leave its own modest traces in the world of letters. The first Latin inscriptions, often simple and functional, appeared on stone monuments and everyday objects. These early marks, strong and clear, were the foundation stones of what would become a vast literary tradition. Latin letters, borrowed in part from the Etruscan script, were arranged with deliberate care, each stroke pressed firmly into stone as if to resist the slow erosion of time itself. These inscriptions often recorded names, honors, or official decrees, quietly asserting presence and identity in a world still settling into its many voices. Around 550 years before today, far to the east, the Persian Empire under Darius I commissioned cuneiform inscriptions that echoed across the deserts and mountains. These monumental texts, carved into rock faces and palace walls, were written in Old Persian cuneiform, a streamlined script designed to proclaim the king's deeds and authority to all who passed. The wedges pressed into stone carried long lists of titles, territories, and divine favors, unfolding slowly like the turning of ancient gears. The inscriptions stood as steadfast whispers of power, meant to last through ages of silence, and remind the world of a ruler who sought to bind his vast realm with words made solid and enduring. Somewhere near 500 years before today's gentle counting, in the vast and varied lands of ancient India, a quiet revolution took shape upon stone and palm leaf. The Brahmi script emerged, its elegant lines and curves like soft strokes brushed across the fabric of language. This script would become the gentle ancestor of many South Asian writing systems, from the sweeping Devanagari to the delicate Tamil letters, carrying the whispers of countless stories, prayers, and royal edicts through centuries. Brahmi shapes seem to flow like a slow river, guiding the hand that inscribes them and inviting the eye to rest upon their balanced forms. In these marks, one can sense the early stirrings of a written tradition poised to bloom across mountains and plains, linking cultures in the softest of ways. Not far away, around 450 years before now, the city of Athens was alive with civic pride and a desire for transparency. Public decrees, those formal announcements that shaped the lives of citizens, were carefully inscribed onto sturdy stone slabs and placed in visible spaces like the bustling agora. These inscriptions were more than mere words, they were the voice of democracy, carved firmly but kindly into the shared space of the city. The letters, etched by artisans with steady chisels, caught the light of sun and shadow, marking laws and decisions in a way that invited all eyes to see and understand. It was as if the stones themselves whispered reminders of civic duty, echoing softly across time in marble columns. Around 400 years before our current day, far to the west in the lush jungles and sun-dappled valleys of Mesoamerica, the Maya began weaving their own tapestry of signs and symbols. The Maya script, intricate and flowing, started to take shape upon pottery, bark paper, and carved stone. Each glyph was a tiny work of art, combining pictorial images with phonetic elements that spoke to gods, kings, and cosmic cycles. This writing system moved with the rhythm of the seasons and the motions of stars, a quiet reflection of a culture deeply entwined with nature's pulse. The glyphs seemed to dance gently, as if leaves caught in a slow breeze, telling stories both earthly and divine with tender patience. By about 300 years before the present, on the rugged edges of northwest India, another script was beginning its soft journey. Known as Kharosthi, this writing borrowed from Aramaic influences but grew into a unique form, used primarily for recording administrative matters and Buddhist texts. Its characters, often slanting gracefully to the right, were carefully inscribed on birch bark, stone, and coins. The script's fluid lines carried not just words but the quiet spread of ideas and faith across trade routes threading through mountains and deserts. It was a script of connection, bridging peoples with its calm, rhythmic marks, like the steady ticking of ancient gears turning through time. And somewhere near 250 years before our era, far to the east in China's lush river valleys, a remarkable invention was quietly taking root. Craftsmen began to create a material much like paper, made from softened hemp fibers pressed and dried into thin sheets. This early paper-like substance was lighter and more flexible than the heavy bamboo slips or silk that had been used before, inviting new possibilities for writing and record-keeping. Though humble in appearance, this innovation carried the promise of spreading knowledge more easily, like a feather drifting on a gentle breeze, ready to catch the inked words of scholars and scribes for generations yet to come. Around 200 BCE, in the quieter corners of the Roman Republic, a softer hand began shaping the written word. It was not the proud, straight-backed capitals chiseled into stone, but something looser, almost breathing. Early cursive Latin drifted into being wherever speed was needed, in market ledgers, private letters, and notes scratched onto wax tablets. The strokes bent, sometimes leaning toward one another, sometimes looping in ways the stonecutters would never dare. Ink and stylus moved with a kind of hurried grace, recording debts, agreements, and thoughts before they slipped away. Even in its quickness, there was personality, a flick of the wrist here, a sudden narrowing of a loop there, marks that revealed the hand behind them more intimately than any formal script could. This was writing as conversation rather than proclamation, and it quietly foreshadowed the many cursive hands yet to come. By 100 BC, far from Rome, another kind of quiet preservation was underway in the dry caves near the Dead Sea. There, scrolls of parchment and papyrus carried words in Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek, sacred writings, community laws, calendars, and hymns. The Dead Sea Scrolls rested in clay jars, sealed away from light and weather, waiting through centuries of silence. Their letters were precise yet alive, formed by scribes who saw each stroke as an act of devotion. In the still air of the caves, the ink held fast, its message waiting patiently for eyes that would not be born for more than 2,000 years. Around the year 105 CE, beneath the vast skies of ancient China, a quiet craft was refined into something almost magical. Kai Lun, an official of the imperial court, is credited with formalizing the paper-making process, an artful blend of softened hemp fibers, mulberry bark, and rags, all beaten into a delicate, fibrous pulp. This pulp was then spread thin and dried into sheets that were light, smooth, and far more practical than the heavy bamboo slips or costly silk previously used. Imagine hands gently pressing and smoothing these sheets, the fibers intertwining like moss weaving itself slowly over stone. This invention was not loud or flashy, but it carried with it the gentle promise of knowledge spreading more freely, words floating on pages like drifting feathers in a calm breeze. Paper became a silent companion for scholars and scribes, a tender surface waiting patiently to hold stories, records, and wisdom for generations to come. Around 200 years after the Common Era, the familiar scrolls that had long whispered through Roman hands began to share space with the newer form, the codex. Bound pages, stacked like the soft layers of a mossy forest floor, replaced the rolled sheets that required careful unspooling. This shift made reading a more intimate, deliberate act, allowing minds to wander slowly through texts without the interruption of turning endless scrolls. Books could be opened flat, corners gently lifted, and passages easily revisited, like tracing the slow dance of turning gears in an ancient clock. The Codex, humble and practical, quietly transformed how stories, laws, and knowledge traveled, making them more accessible and durable as the world beneath marble columns and dusty streets slowly turned onward. As the centuries drifted toward 300 CE, in the shadowy forests of northern Europe, a new style of writing began to emerge, the Gothic script. This script was distinct, its letters tall and narrow, with sharp angles and tight curves that seemed to climb the page like the slender branches of ancient trees reaching for soft light. Often called blackletter for its dense, dark appearance, Gothic script adorned manuscripts, official documents, and religious texts. The strokes, like slowly falling leaves caught in a gentle breeze, carried the weight of solemnity and reverence. Its intricate forms whispered of a world both sacred and scholarly, where words were crafted with care and patience, meant to be savored slowly, as if each letter was a small work of art etched into the quiet fabric of history. Around 350 years after the gentle turning of the Common Era's early centuries, far to the south in the highlands of Ethiopia, the Ge'ez script quietly began to take form. This script, with its flowing, almost musical curves and strokes, carried within it the breath of a people and their sacred words. Ge'ez was more than just letters, it was a living thread weaving together the language of liturgy, history, and daily life. Written on parchment or etched softly into stone, its characters moved like slow, flowing streams carving their way through the rugged landscapes, carrying with them prayers, royal decrees, and tales whispered across generations. The shapes of Ge'ez are rounded and elegant, each stroke a gentle nod to the rhythms of speech and song, inviting the eye to rest upon them as if watching feathers drifting down through still air. It is a script that holds both the past and the present, bridging time with a patient, steady hand. A little later, as the 4th century unfolded, the Emerald Hills of Ireland became home to another unique way of writing. The Ogham script, often carved vertically into stone pillars standing solitary in misty fields, is made up of simple lines and notches along a central stem. These marks might seem sparse or minimal, but their silent rhythm holds the names of people, tribes, or places, inscribed carefully by hands skilled in the delicate art of stone carving. Imagine the cold touch of the chisel against granite, the tiny chips falling like soft snowflakes onto moss below, as each line is measured and scored with quiet reverence. Ogham's stark simplicity contrasts with the lush green surroundings, its marks like the slow heartbeat of a landscape steeped in history and myth. These stones were not just writing but monuments, enduring whispers of identity standing firm against the slow passage of time. Around 500 years into the Common Era, the sands and rocky hills of the Arabian Peninsula witnessed the emergence of a graceful new script. Born from the Nabatean Aramaic script, the Arabic script began to evolve, its flowing cursive forms rippling like warm desert winds over dunes. This script was soft and continuous, letters linking together in seamless chains that captured the poetic cadence of the Arabic language. Its elegant curves and loops carry the cadence of speech itself, embodying the rhythm and melody of spoken words in shapes both fluid and refined. As it developed, Arabic script became not only a tool for communication but a cherished art form, adorning manuscripts, architecture, and sacred texts with its intricate calligraphy. Like feathers drifting on a gentle breeze, its letters invite one to slow down and savor the beauty hidden within the written word. A century later, around 600 years into our current era, the earliest surviving manuscripts of the Quran began to take shape on parchment and vellum, their pages inscribed with a carefully formed Arabic script. These manuscripts carry a solemn stillness, the words written with devotion and meticulous care, each letter a quiet meditation. The script's elegant strokes meander across the page, punctuated by delicate diacritical marks that guide the reader's voice. In the soft glow of candlelight, scribes worked patiently, their hands steady as they preserved sacred verses meant to be read, recited, and remembered. These early manuscripts are treasures of calm reverence, their pages whispering stories of faith and tradition across the centuries like slowly turning gears in an ancient, enduring clockwork. By 700 years past the Common Era's beginning, the forests, fjords, and rugged coastlines of Scandinavia were marked with the mysterious runes of the Germanic peoples. These runic inscriptions, carved into stone, wood, and bone, carry angular shapes that seem to capture the flicker of shadows beneath dense pine branches. Each rune, simple yet profound, was more than just a letter. It held magical and symbolic meaning, believed to carry power beyond the spoken word. The act of carving runes was deliberate and slow, the chisel biting softly into surfaces as the carver's mind drifted into the sacred rhythm of the task. These inscriptions marked graves, monuments, and everyday objects alike, weaving a tapestry of communication and ritual that connected communities through space and time. Like slowly falling leaves settling on a quiet forest floor, runes whisper of a world where language and mystery dance in quiet harmony. In the quiet span of the mid-8th century, around 750 CE, the steady hands of artisans in China began pressing carved wooden blocks into ink and laying them gently upon paper, creating the first printed texts known to history. This early woodblock printing was not a hurried process. Each block had to be carved with precision, every character mirrored in reverse so that it might appear correctly on the page. The ink would soak softly into the paper's fibers, leaving behind lines as delicate as frost on a windowpane. It was a craft both patient and rhythmic, like breathing. Through this method, Buddhist scriptures such as the Diamond Sutra could be reproduced and shared far beyond their places of origin, letting words flow like rivers across valleys and through generations. The slow, deliberate press of each block was as much an act of devotion as of technology, a meeting point of art, belief, and preservation. By the year 800 CE, across the vast continent and the courts and monasteries of Charlemagne's empire, another quiet revolution in writing was unfolding. Carolingian minuscule, a clear, rounded script, was being standardized so that scholars and scribes could more easily read and share texts. Its letters were evenly spaced and modest in their ornamentation, a soft and disciplined departure from the cramped, angular writing that came before. On parchment pages, the smooth arcs of the minuscule looked almost like beads of dew strung along a spider's thread, orderly, unhurried, and full of quiet grace. Monks bent over their desks, quills moving with measured care, ensuring that words would be legible not just for their own time, but for centuries yet to come. This gentle shaping of the written form laid the groundwork for much of Europe's literary preservation, a script that carried clarity like a lantern through the long corridors of the Middle Ages. Around 900 years into the gentle unfolding of our current era, in the islands of Japan, a new form of writing began to take shape, the kana syllabary. This script evolved thoughtfully from the more complex Chinese characters that had long been imported from the mainland. Rather than attempting to replicate every nuance of meaning, kana simplified and softened the written word, capturing sounds more directly and delicately, much like individual feathers drifting down from a tree canopy. The two main sets, hiragana and katakana, each with their own shapes and rhythms, allowed the Japanese language to be expressed in a way that was both intimate and flowing. These characters adorned poetry and private letters, weaving a tapestry of sound and sense that was easier to grasp than the dense forest of Chinese ideograms. It was a tender transformation, one that embraced simplicity while preserving beauty, inviting readers to move gently through words like a slow stream threading mossy stones. By the turn of the first millennium, in the misty lands of Anglo-Saxon England, some of the earliest surviving manuscripts in Old English began to appear. These texts, painstakingly written on vellum or parchment, carried the everyday speech of the people, wrapped in the formal beauty of Latin script. The pages often bore the marks of scholars and scribes, their quills dancing carefully to preserve stories, laws, and religious teachings. The letters stand firm yet modest, their strokes deliberate but unhurried, like the slow turning of ancient wooden gears deep within a weathered mill. These manuscripts whisper of a world-bridging oral tradition and the written word, capturing the voices of a people settling into memory and history through patient inscription. A little beyond the middle of the 11th century, the Armenian people began to see their first printed texts emerge, made with carved wooden blocks that echoed the earlier practices of East Asia yet were uniquely their own. These prints carried religious and literary texts, spreading knowledge gently across communities nestled in mountainous landscapes. Each wooden block, carved with care, pressed ink softly onto pages that awaited words like dew on moss. The process was slow and deliberate, transforming the intimate act of writing into a quiet mechanical rhythm that could reproduce text more widely, yet still with a tender touch. This method allowed Armenian culture to preserve its language and faith with an enduring grace, the printed pages acting as soft bridges across time and place, whispering stories long after the tools had been set aside. Around the year 1100 of the Common Era, somewhere in the warm, sun-dappled landscapes of Spain, the first European paper mills quietly began their gentle hum. These early mills took inspiration from the softer, fibrous papers of the East, yet adapted their own steady rhythms, pulping linen and cotton rags into sheets that would soon cradle the written word more tenderly than ever before. Imagine the slow turning of large water wheels, their creaks blending softly with the murmuring streams that powered them, while workers labored patiently to lift delicate sheets of paper from vats of milky pulp. This innovation marked a subtle turning point, for paper was lighter and easier to handle than parchment or vellum, making the spread of knowledge feel a bit like feathers caught in a breeze, drifting farther and settling more gently across the map of Europe. By the 12th century, the script known as Gothic had woven itself deeply into the fabric of Western Europe's written culture. Its letters were tall, dark, and tightly packed, like slender trees in a dense, shadowy forest. The pointed arches and angular strokes of Gothic script adorned everything from religious manuscripts to official documents, their forms demanding slow, careful attention from readers. To the untrained eye, the script might appear dense or even impenetrable, but to those accustomed to its rhythms, it was a familiar path, guiding the eye through words with the steady cadence of turning gears in an ancient clock. The beauty of Gothic script lay in its complexity and precision, each letter a small monument of ink, standing firm yet graceful against the passage of time. In the 13th century, beneath the vast skies of Persia under the Ilkhanate dynasty, calligraphy blossomed into a refined art form of exquisite delicacy. Persian calligraphers, with brushes held lightly between their fingers, created flowing lines and elegant curves that seemed to float like drifting silk ribbons over the smooth surfaces of paper and parchment. This script was not merely functional, it was a dance of form and meaning, capturing poetry, philosophy, and sacred texts with a softness that invited contemplation. The brushstrokes glided slowly, creating letters that intertwined like vines growing gently through a secret garden. This flourishing of Persian calligraphy transformed writing into a visual melody, where every curve and dot was imbued with the quiet devotion of an artist and scholar wrapped in the peaceful hush of a moonlit night. By the early 15th century, in the distant lands of Korea, a remarkable invention began to reshape the world of letters: movable type. Here, individual characters, carved from wood or metal, could be arranged and rearranged like small, delicate gears, clicking softly into place to form words, sentences, and entire pages. This system made printing more flexible and efficient, allowing texts to be reproduced without the painstaking carving of entire blocks. The invention quietly accelerated the spread of knowledge, carrying stories, teachings, and records far beyond their places of origin. Imagine the slow clatter of typesetting, the soft impressions of ink pressing onto paper, each page emerging like a gentle sigh in the dim light of a scholar's workshop. Not long after, in the mid-15th century, somewhere in the workshops of Mainz, Germany, Johannes Gutenberg took this concept further, inventing movable metal type. These small metal letters, durable and precise, allowed for even more refined and rapid printing. Gutenberg's printing press slowly turned, each revolution stamping words onto paper with a rhythmic certainty like the measured ticks of a great clock. The Gutenberg Bible, printed in the 1450s, stands as a quiet testament to this transformation, a merging of technology and tradition, where the slow, deliberate craft of printing breathed new life into the written word, spreading knowledge gently yet irrevocably across Europe and eventually the world. In the quiet year of 1455, nestled in the softly shadowed streets of Mainz, Germany, the Gutenberg Bible emerged from the steady hum of the printing press. This monumental work was not just a book but a delicate symphony of craftsmanship and technology, where each page was born from the rhythmic dance of metal type pressing ink onto paper. The letters, shaped with meticulous care, aligned into columns that flowed like slow streams of quiet thought, inviting readers to linger gently over sacred words. The Gutenberg Bible carried the weight of centuries of tradition, yet its very creation marked a new era. Words could now drift farther and settle softly in the hands of many, no longer locked away in fragile manuscripts. Imagine the faint scent of ink and paper mingling with the cool air of the workshop, the gentle clatter of type as it was reset for each page, and the slow turning of pages destined to outlast generations, whispering their timeless stories. By the dawn of the 16th century, around 1500 CE, the elegant italic typeface was born in the bustling city of Venice. This script, with its graceful slant and flowing strokes, offered a more personal and refined voice for printed text. Designed to mimic the quick, cursive handwriting of Italian humanists, italic letters appeared as if leaning softly forward, like delicate feathers caught in a gentle breeze. Printers embraced this style for its readability and charm, using it to set poetry, correspondence, and scholarly works that felt both intimate and sophisticated. The italic typeface brought a new softness to the hard edges of print, allowing the written word to feel more like a whispered conversation shared beneath leafy branches or the quiet turning of a well-loved journal. Around the middle of the 16th century, near 1550 CE, another quiet innovation unfolded in the realm of print, copperplate engraving. This technique allowed artisans to etch finely detailed illustrations onto copper plates, which were then inked and pressed onto paper, creating images of remarkable clarity and delicacy. Unlike the bold, blocky woodcuts of earlier times, copperplate engravings bore lines so fine they resembled the gentle veins of leaves or the slow ripple of water on a still pond. Artists and printers used this method to adorn books with botanical drawings, maps, and intricate designs that invited viewers to gaze slowly and thoughtfully, as if tracing the slow turning of gears within a forgotten clockwork. The process was laborious, requiring patience and precision, yet it brought a new layer of visual richness to printed works, enhancing the quiet beauty of the written word. By about the year 1600 CE, the murmuring of printed words began to take on a new form in Europe, the newspaper. These early publications were humble collections of news, announcements, and advertisements, often just a single sheet folded to carry whispers from town squares and distant lands. Printed on coarse paper with uneven ink, newspapers moved slowly through streets and markets, their pages rustling softly like dry leaves caught in a gentle breeze. They offered readers a chance to connect with the wider world, sharing tales of weather, politics, and curiosities from beyond the horizon. Though simple in appearance, newspapers carried the promise of connection and knowledge spreading like floating feathers across the continent, inviting people to pause and ponder the ever-turning wheels of time and society. Around 1650 CE, in the quiet corners of England, the first known shorthand system was published. This method offered a way to capture speech with swift, minimal marks, like tiny gears clicking softly into place to record words as they were spoken. Shorthand allowed scribes and secretaries to keep pace with the flow of conversation, meetings, and sermons, their pens tracing symbols that seemed to float lightly over the page. This system was a gentle companion to speech, a way of preserving fleeting sounds with patient precision. Though not widely known beyond certain circles, shorthand quietly transformed how information was recorded and remembered, weaving a delicate thread between the spoken word and the written page, like a slow dance of shadows beneath the mossy canopy of communication's long history. By the dawn of the 18th century, around 1700 CE, the quiet craft of typefounding had settled into a respected and steady profession across Europe. In dimly lit workshops, artisans melted metal alloys and carefully poured them into molds to create tiny letters, each one a small, precise gear in the grand machinery of print. The process required patience and an eye for detail, as these miniature forms needed to fit perfectly together to produce clean, legible pages. The foundries hummed softly, filled with the rhythmic clinking of tools and the faint scent of molten metal cooling slowly. These typefounders were the unseen architects behind printed books, newspapers, and pamphlets, their work quietly shaping the flow of information through the centuries. Like watchmakers assembling delicate timepieces, they ensured each letter would join its companions in orderly procession, guiding readers through pages as steady and slow as the turning of ancient gears. Around the middle of the 18th century, in 1755 CE, a monumental yet softly spoken milestone was reached when Samuel Johnson published his English dictionary. This tome was not a mere collection of words, but a carefully curated map of language, capturing meanings, pronunciations, and usages with a scholar's steady hand. Johnson's work took years, filled with meticulous research and quiet reflection, like a slow journey through the forests of language itself. Each entry was a gentle clearing where words were paused and understood, inviting readers to rest their thoughts and explore the texture of speech. The dictionary became a comforting guide, a steady companion for writers, speakers, and readers alike, its pages holding the hushed wisdom of countless conversations and stories folded softly within its bindings. Stepping into the 19th century, around 1800 CE, the invention of lithography quietly transformed the way images and text could be reproduced. This process, which involved drawing on smooth limestone with greasy crayons and then using the natural repellents of oil and water, allowed for much cheaper and faster printing. Artists and printers could now create detailed illustrations and text in a way that felt almost magical, lines and shading emerging from stone surfaces as if by a slow, deliberate breath. Lithography spread gently through the artistic and commercial worlds, making newspapers, books, and posters more vibrant and accessible. The soft hiss of the press and the slow flow of ink became the new rhythm in printing workshops, turning pages into windows that captured the delicate interplay of light and shadow, much like feathers drifting slowly in a forest glade. A tender innovation came in 1829 CE, when Louis Braille, a young Frenchman who had lost his sight, developed a tactile reading system for the blind. Braille's code used small raised dots arranged in patterns, allowing readers to feel letters and words beneath their fingertips, like tracing slow, soft paths across a mossy forest floor. This system transformed silence into touchable stories, giving the gift of reading to those who could no longer rely on sight. It was a quiet revolution, not loud or flashy, but profound in its gentle impact. Braille's invention invited a new kind of conversation between the written word and the human spirit, where language became a textured, living thing moving softly through the hands and hearts of readers. By 1840 CE, the world of written communication was given another tender nudge with the introduction of postage stamps. These small adhesive squares standardized the sending of letters, allowing written words to travel far and wide with a quiet certainty. Stamps bore images and marks that were often delicate and carefully designed, like tiny flags fluttering softly on envelopes as they journeyed through postal routes. The system brought order and predictability to correspondence, letting messages drift like floating feathers from one place to another, bridging distances both great and small. In the slow turning of postal wheels, letters became cherished vessels of thought and feeling, carried gently across towns and continents, whispering the steady rhythm of human connection. In the soft industrial hum of 1868 CE, Christopher Latham Scholl secured the patent for what would soon become a quiet companion to countless writers, the typewriter. At first, it was a curious, almost awkward contraption, metal arms like delicate spider legs reaching up to press ink onto paper, each keystroke a tiny mechanical sigh. It was not yet the swift and familiar tool it would become, but rather a promise, an intricate bridge between thought and permanence. The arrangement of its letters, the QWERTY layout, was chosen with care to slow down jamming keys, though it would end up shaping how fingers danced across keyboards for generations. In that moment, the act of writing shifted, no longer bound to the slow scratch of pen on paper, but to the crisp, rhythmic tapping of letters appearing instantly in neat lines, as though words had been waiting quietly for a more direct path to the page. By 1870, these typewriters stepped softly from the workshop into the marketplace, their once clumsy mechanics refined into sleeker, more reliable forms. The first commercially successful models were not mass possessions but treasured fixtures in offices, editorial rooms, and the studies of the determined few. Typing became a new kind of craft, fingers moving in deliberate cadence, the steady sound of keys like raindrops on tin roofs. Each letter struck into the page with a little firmness, a tangible echo of the writer's thoughts. And for those who used them daily, there was a quiet comfort in the ritual, the placement of paper, the gentle pull of the carriage return, the muted ding that signaled a fresh line waiting to be filled. When the year 1880 arrived, another gentle transformation took root in the bustling rooms of newspaper presses, the linotype machine. It was a marvel of both speed and precision, casting whole lines of metal type in moments, where before, compositors had set letters one by one with careful, weary hands. The linotype's warm, molten lead poured into molds as if language itself were being forged, solid and tangible. This new rhythm quickened the heartbeat of newsrooms. Stories could be set in hours rather than days, letting the printed word keep pace with the turning of the world. Yet there was something almost hypnotic in its operation, the clicking of keys, the whir of moving parts, the soft clink of cooling type. It was a machine born of urgency but wrapped in the steady, unhurried craftsmanship of its makers, a quiet revolution disguised in mechanical grace. By the turn of 1900 CE, the elegant sweep of fountain pens found its way into everyday life. No longer did one have to pause constantly to dip a nib into ink, now the ink traveled silently within the pen itself, ready to flow in smooth, uninterrupted lines. These pens became more than tools, they were small treasures, each with a weight and balance that felt personal in the hand. In quiet studies and bustling offices alike, they offered a softer intimacy than the typewriter's clatter, writing that curved and breathed with the writer's mood, each stroke swelling or fading like a whispered conversation. The slow glide of a fountain pen across paper was its own kind of meditation, ink unfurling like tendrils of smoke, carrying thoughts from mind to page with patient ease. In 1920 CE, Laszlo Biro's invention of the ballpoint pen was still a fragile idea, but its promise was profound. By enclosing a tiny rolling ball at the tip, ink could be delivered cleanly without blotting or constant refilling. Early prototypes were temperamental, but the vision was clear, a pen that could write anywhere, on nearly any surface, without pause. It was a tool for movement, for quick notes and sudden thoughts, for pockets and journeys. In time, it would become one of the most quietly ubiquitous objects in the world, light enough to forget, reliable enough to depend on, carrying words swiftly without the delicate ceremony of fountain ink. By 1930 CE, the arrival of teletype machines brought a new, humming thread of connection between distant places. These sturdy devices took typed letters and sent them electrically over wires, their messages emerging on faraway machines almost as quickly as they were composed. Offices, newsrooms, and government centers filled with the low chatter of their keys, a mechanical murmur that spoke of information flowing unseen through the air and ground. There was something almost magical in their quiet efficiency, typed words stepping onto paper in another city, another country, while the sender still sat warm in their own chair. It was the typewriter's voice carried across invisible bridges, speaking softly but with remarkable reach. In the year 1940 CE, nestled quietly within the labs of Chester Carlson, a subtle marvel was born, the first photocopier. Unlike the careful, deliberate act of handwriting or typewriting, this invention promised to capture and reproduce images and text almost instantly, like catching a whisper and folding it into many copies. Carlson's process, called electrophotography, used light and static electricity to lift inked impressions from one surface to another, a gentle dance of particles invisible to the eye. Though the first machines were slow and cumbersome, they carried the tender promise of spreading information with ease and grace, quietly changing offices and libraries into places where documents could multiply softly, like moss growing steadily over stones. This invention unfolded slowly into the world, bringing with it a new rhythm, one of replication and quiet sharing, where the written word no longer needed to be rewritten by hand or painstakingly reset in type. By the 1960s, a new era of writing tools quietly emerged with the advent of electronic typewriters. These machines retained the familiar clatter of keys but replaced many of the mechanical parts with electrical components, smoothing the motions and easing the work of typists. The letters still appeared sharply on paper, but the machine itself hummed with a gentler, more modern energy. In offices and homes alike, electronic typewriters allowed writers to work with a newfound steadiness, removing some of the physical effort while preserving the tactile connection between fingers and keys. Their presence was like a soft murmur amid the louder changes to come, a bridge from the old rhythms of metal and ink toward the glowing screens and digital spaces of the future. A quietly transformative moment arrived in 1971 CE with the first email sent over ARPANET, the distant ancestor of today's vast Internet. This early message was simple, a small step in a world of communication, yet it carried an almost magical weight, words traveling invisibly through wires, connecting people miles apart in an instant. This leap from paper and physical media to electronic pulses was a delicate shift, as if thoughts had learned to drift on currents of electricity like feathers floating over a mossy forest floor. The arrival of email changed the very nature of correspondence, making it faster, lighter, and more ephemeral, but also more immediate and present. It was a whisper exchanged between distant souls, a gentle tapping that promised to grow louder and more constant over time. By 1975 CE, the introduction of portable word processors offered writers a new kind of freedom. These compact machines combined the tactile familiarity of typewriting with electronic memory, allowing users to compose, edit, and store text away from the desk. They were quiet companions, small enough to carry yet powerful enough to hold pages of words, like a personal notebook that could gently capture ideas wherever inspiration might drift. The hum of their keys was softer than before, their screens small and dim, inviting concentration and hushed moments. These devices began to reshape writing habits, encouraging slow, deliberate crafting and careful revision, all wrapped in a gentle cloak of newfound mobility. As the 1980s dawned, personal computers quietly began to settle into homes and offices, transforming the landscape of writing and creativity. Unlike earlier machines, these computers offered screens to display text and programs that could correct and rearrange words instantly. The glow of the monitor was soft but persistent, inviting writers to sit for long stretches in quiet focus. With the release of Microsoft Word in 1983, the gentle art of word processing found a friendly guide. This software provided tools for editing and formatting with ease, helping words to flow and transform like the slow turning of gears within a finely tuned clock. The personal computer and its software quietly ushered in a new chapter, where writing was no longer bound to ink and paper, but could breathe and grow within the luminous glow of a screen, wrapped in the stillness of thoughtful creation. Around 1990 CE, a gentle revolution in printing quietly unfolded as laser printers became affordable for home use. Before this time, printing crisp, clean pages had often required trips to busy offices or specialized shops, where machines hummed with a steady, industrious rhythm. But with laser printers entering homes, the ability to produce neat documents shifted into the intimate realm of personal space. These printers worked by using focused beams of light to draw images and letters with precision onto paper coated in powdery toner. It was a process both scientific and poetic, a silent ballet of light and dust forming words and pictures with delicate exactness. The soft warmth of the machine, the quiet whir of rollers, and the faint scent of toner created a new kind of atmosphere, where writing could be shared not only through screens or handcrafted pages but by the gentle, steady flow of printed sheets emerging right from one's own desk. This shift made the tangible feel close again, even as the digital world grew larger and more distant. By the mid-1990s, roughly 1995 CE, the landscape of writing began to change shape once more, this time on the glowing surfaces of computer screens. Blogs emerged as a new, personal form of expression, websites where individuals could share thoughts, stories, and opinions without editors or printing presses. These digital diaries fluttered softly like leaves caught in a slow current, their words drifting across the internet to reach unseen eyes. Blogging gave voice to the quiet musings of countless people, weaving a vast tapestry of experience and reflection. Unlike traditional publishing, blogs were immediate and intimate, inviting readers to pause, ponder, and sometimes respond in kind. In these spaces, writing was less about polished perfection and more about gentle sharing, a slow unfolding of self, captured in text and image, floating lightly on the gentle breeze of the web. The dawn of the new millennium, around the year 2000 CE, brought another subtle shift in how we connect through words. The rise of text messaging. Once limited to brief, often cryptic notes, texting grew into a widespread language of its own, crafted on small screens held close in hands or pockets. Each message was a tiny bubble of thought sent instantly across invisible waves, carrying greetings, jokes, reminders, and fragments of daily life. The brevity and speed of texts invited a new kind of writing, one that was quick, informal, and playful, yet often packed with meaning beneath its surface. Typing on tiny keypads or early touchscreens, people exchanged messages that floated softly between them, like feathers drifting through the quiet spaces of everyday moments. Texting became a gentle rhythm of modern conversation, bridging distances and silences with the simple touch of a finger. Then, in 2004 CE, the arrival of Facebook accelerated this gentle digital tide. Suddenly, informal writing spilled into a vast shared space where thoughts, photos, and stories were posted for friends and strangers alike. This new platform encouraged brief bursts of expression, status updates, comments, and messages that sparkled like soft embers glowing in a cozy hearth. Writing became a way to weave social connections, creating a tapestry of voices gently overlapping and intertwining. The pace was lively but never rushed, a steady stream of digital whispers that could be savored or ignored at leisure. In this new landscape, the personal and public blurred, and writing transformed into a soft dialogue echoing through the mossy forests of the internet, inviting participation and reflection in equal measure. By 2007 CE, the emergence of smartphones with touchscreen typing brought yet another delicate evolution. These sleek devices placed the keyboard directly beneath fingertips, offering a tactile surface that seemed to hum softly with each tap and swipe. Writing became even more immediate, unfolding in bursts of messages, emails, and notes created anywhere, on park benches, in quiet rooms, or while wandering beneath tree canopies. The touchscreen allowed fingers to glide and pause, crafting words with a softness that echoed the turning of gently winding gears. This integration of hardware and software created a seamless flow between thought and text, dissolving barriers between writer and screen. In the hush of a glowing phone screen, writing became a quiet companion, always close, always ready, whispering stories and thoughts into the vast, starry night of digital communication. In the gentle unfolding of the 2010s, around 2010 CE, tablets began to bloom quietly into the lives of many, offering a new way to engage with writing through handwriting recognition. These devices, sleek and smooth as polished stones, invited fingers and styluses to dance softly across their glass surfaces, capturing the fluid motion of cursive letters and transforming them into digital text. The sensation was something like tracing gentle patterns on moss-covered bark, where each stroke was recorded, understood, and translated with careful grace. For writers and note-takers, this was a subtle merging of the tactile and the technological, a slow bridge between the ancient act of putting pen to paper and the modern ease of digital storage. The quiet promise was that handwriting's familiar intimacy would not be lost but preserved and enhanced, nestling comfortably within the glowing light of screens. By the middle of the decade, around 2015 CE, a new companion entered the writing journey: AI language models. These digital entities, born from countless lines of code and mountains of text, began assisting writers in gentle, often unseen ways. Like a slow and thoughtful guide, AI could suggest phrases, correct errors, or offer ideas, nudging creativity forward without haste or urgency. It was as if a patient friend whispered softly from the shadows, ready to help shape words without overshadowing the human hand. The collaboration between writer and machine unfolded with the quiet rhythm of gears turning in a distant clock tower, steady, reliable, and quietly transformative. The world shifted unexpectedly in 2020 when a global pandemic nudged much of human communication into digital spaces. Suddenly, screens became the primary stage for conversations, meetings, and storytelling. Writing flourished anew in this quiet, virtual realm, carrying voices across silent distances like floating feathers on a gentle breeze. Emails, messages, and documents became lifelines, their words knitting communities together when physical presence was scarce. This shift was both abrupt and tender, reminding us how writing, whether typed or handwritten, remains a soft, essential thread connecting us through even the loneliest times. By 2023 CE, the landscape of writing grew even more enchanted as large-scale AI tools began to generate entire documents and creative works. These tools, vast and intricate as ancient libraries, could compose essays, stories, and poems with a quiet competence that sometimes surprised their human collaborators. Yet, this new magic was not a replacement but a partner, an echoing presence that offered drafts and ideas, inviting writers to shape and refine with care. Writing became a shared dance, between human intention and digital suggestion, a slow waltz moving beneath softly turning gears. Looking ahead toward 2025 CE, writing remains quietly essential, though increasingly woven into the fabric of AI-driven tools. Words continue to bloom and take shape, not just from pens or keyboards but through a gentle partnership with technology that supports without rushing. The act of writing has grown more layered, a tender interplay of thought, machine, and heart, always present, softly humming beneath the surface of our daily lives. It is a gentle reminder that, no matter how tools evolve, the slow, patient craft of turning thoughts into words endures as a comforting, unchanging lullaby. And so, we have drifted, my listener, from bone to wall, from token to tablet, from counting to writing. You need not remember the years, or the names, or even the shapes. The story will be here, quietly, whenever you wish to return. If your eyes are closed, if your thoughts are drifting, then my job here is done for today. Thank you for spending this unremarkable moment with me. You have listened to The Sleepy Sloth, where uninteresting things become the softest lullabies.